The Middle East is dominating the headlines once again across the nation. What could be done to stop what appears to be a runaway train? Find out on this edition of For the Record.
Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I, as a consumer, are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of For the Record. We are pleased to be joined by an expert in Middle East relations with an exceptional career as a U.S. civil servant at the CIA, the National Security Council, and author of Going to Tehran, Why America Must Accept the Islamic Republic of Iran, professor of international affairs at Penn State, Dr. Flynt Leverett. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Leverett, more so than usual, the Middle East is dominating worldwide headlines across the globe. And let's start with Iran, ironically, with the Prime Minister of Israel speaking to Congress this week. Why in every situation in the Middle East does it seem like Iran is one of the central figures?
Because Iran is this absolutely critical, unavoidable country in the Middle East. Under any political order, Iran, given its demographic and territorial size, given its geostrategic location, given its enormous hydrocarbon resources, given its history and identity, it's a civilizational state with a history basically as long as China's. Given all of these factors, under any political order, Iran is going to be an important country in Middle Eastern regional affairs. But under this particular political order, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has basically, since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, tried to create a political order, an indigenously generated political order that combines participatory politics and elections with elements of Islamic governance, and has worked very hard to deliver on a revolutionary commitment to the Iranian people to pursue foreign policy independence, even in defiance of the United States. With that kind of combination, foreign policy independence, participatory Islamist governance, as much as Americans may find it hard to accept, it gives this particular Iran a kind of legitimacy, a kind of formidable quality that makes it absolutely unavoidable in regional affairs.
Their foreign policy and their relations with the United States, how does the United States go to Tehran and get somewhat normalized relations?
I think the key is to do what President Nixon did in the early 1970s to get normal relations with the People's Republic of China. From 1949, when the communists defeated the Kuomintang in China's civil war and established the People's Republic, the United States tried to isolate China diplomatically, tried to strangle it economically, and didn't just support regime change. We supported this whole other political order based in Taiwan, said that was the real government of China. And that policy was disastrous for the U.S. position in Asia. We would not have been involved in the draining quagmire of Vietnam but for this really counterproductive policy toward China. What Nixon did in the early 70s that enabled a realignment of relations between the United States and China was to accept the People's Republic of China as a legitimate political order representing legitimate Chinese national interests. That's what the United States needs to do today for its own interests, to save its own strategic position. It needs to recognize the Islamic Republic of Iran as a legitimate political order representing legitimate Iranian national interests and come to terms with it on that basis.
Is that part of the negotiations right now regarding their nuclear program?
In a not very clearly stated, very preliminary way, I think it is. If the Obama administration is able to conclude a nuclear deal with Iran, it could and should be a first step on the road to this kind of acceptance and a realignment of U.S.-Iranian relations. If that happened, it would be, I think, one of the most important and positive developments in American diplomacy since Nixon went to China. We have yet to see if the Obama administration is going to be capable of seeing that through.
Would you say that this point in our time with the Obama administration and these negotiations, that this might be the most critical moment that people look back on, say, for the next 100 years in regards to that region?
Quite possibly. This is going to be a watershed. If the United States can't close a nuclear deal with this particular set of Iranian leaders, with this Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, with this Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, and with the backing of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, if the Obama administration can't close a nuclear deal with this group of Iranian leaders, you really have to ask what group of Iranian leaders could the United States close this deal with. And so one way or another, either with a deal or without a deal, I think this is going to be a watershed year.
Does the speech by Prime Minister Netanyahu, does that damage the possibility for that to happen? Just the speech, not any actions itself?
We have to see how Congress, how other parts of the body politic here in the United States react to the speech. I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu said anything particularly new in terms of his own views about Iran, and I don't think he really represented something outside the mainstream of Israeli views on Iran. Essentially, the Israelis don't want us to come to terms with Iran until Iran is somehow ruled by a very, very different political order that would be essentially willing, as the Shah was willing to do before the 1979 revolution, subordinate Iran's foreign policy to Western preferences. I don't think that's going to happen in Iran. And I think that the United States, for its own interests, needs to do this deal, needs to come to terms with the Islamic Republic. The region is going to be better off, and ultimately Israel will be better off as a result.
We are talking the United States and Iran relations and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress. You are watching WHVL's For the Record. Back with more right after this. Welcome back to WHVL's For the Record. Joining us in the studio, Dr. Flynt Leverett, Professor of International Affairs at Penn State and author of Going to Tehran. Professor, we left off talking about what the stability of an Iran could mean for the region. How important is it for the U.S.?
I think it's critical. For a quarter century, since the first Persian Gulf War, which coincided with the end of the Cold War, basically for 25 years, the United States has tried to establish itself as a hegemonic power, as the dominant power in the Middle East. And as part of that effort, it has tried to use military force, sanctions, other coercive policy tools to micromanage political outcomes in the region to consolidate a pro-American political and security order there. This effort has not just failed in the sense that it's not worked. It has been grossly counterproductive for American interests. The United States today is weaker in terms of its ability to achieve its own high-profile objectives and defend its real interests in this critical part of the world as a result. And the alternative to seeking hegemony, to seeking dominance, is basically balance, to let a balance of power work in the region. But that requires that the United States be diplomatically and strategically engaged with all major regional players, not just Israel, not just Saudi Arabia, but also with countries that aren't willing to subordinate themselves to an American-dominated security order, but who are still critical players in the region, and Iran first and foremost among those. So if the United States is going to arrest the decline of its own strategic position in this part of the world, it's going to have to adopt a different strategy, and diplomatic engagement, strategic engagement with the Islamic Republic of Iran is as essential to that kind of strategic recovery as realignment with the People's Republic of China proved to be for the revival of the American position in Asia after Vietnam.
Can we point to a certain time in history over those last 25 years where you could say this was a missed key opportunity, whether it be the regime that was in control from 1997 to 2005, whether it is allowing the rise of ISIS now, whether it was not taking out Saddam Hussein at the end of the Gulf War, whether it was actually invading Iraq in the early 2000s. Is there a specific point in time you could say this was a missed opportunity?
I personally think that the decision to invade and occupy Iraq in 2003 was a major blunder. I left my position as Senior Director for Middle East Affairs at the National Security Council at the White House just a couple of weeks before that invasion started, left government service at that point. I should say the timing of my departure wasn't coincidental. I thought then that this was going to be a major strategic blunder. I could not see any way that 5 years out, 10 years out, that the United States wouldn't be significantly weaker in the Middle East as a result of invading Iraq. Nothing in the intervening period has persuaded me otherwise. If anything, I think I underestimated how damaging that decision would turn out to be. We've certainly missed opportunities on multiple fronts, including dealing with Iran. I think that the Iranians have repeatedly over the years, when the United States has asked them for help on specific issues, whether it was Afghanistan after 9/11, whether it was getting hostages out of Lebanon, the Iranians have responded to those overtures and have done much of what the United States asked them to do. But in the end, for relations to realign, the Islamic Republic of Iran, its leadership wants to know that the United States has accepted this political order as the legitimate representative of Iranian national interests. And that's something which no American administration up to this point has been willing to do. And so I think there have been a number of missed opportunities with Iran. I hope that the current nuclear negotiations don't turn out to be another one.
We have the nuclear negotiations. We have cooperation with Iran on ISIS front. ISIS is now... Indirectly. ISIS is now 500 miles from the coast of Italy with a base in Libya. This was something that we had normalized relations with Libya under a prior administration. How dangerous is that?
Look, I think that our intervention in Libya is a perfect illustration of what I mean by the counterproductive consequences of trying to be a dominant power. I was personally involved when I was in government in the negotiations that led in 2003, led to the Libyan government basically letting the United States come in, dismantle its weapons of mass destruction programs, to get out of the terrorism business to the U.S. government's satisfaction, and to normalize relations with the United States. Basically, what the Libyan government wanted was, okay, the United States government isn't going to try and overthrow you. You know, this is the package. This is the deal. Less than a decade later, in a way to try to co-opt the Arab Spring, the Obama administration launches this intervention in Libya, basically to come down on one side of a civil war against the Libyan government. We help the rebels overthrow the Libyan government. There is no meaningful state structure in place. The state in Libya has been broken. These opposition forces that we supported, in many cases, turned out to be Islamist jihadis, many of whom are now associated with the Islamic State. The groups that murdered the U.S. ambassador in Libya and other official Americans there, those guys were all supported either by the United States or by our allies in the Libya intervention. We have created a worse security situation in North Africa, in Libya, than existed before we went in.
We are talking Middle East affairs with Dr. Flynt Leverett, Professor of International Affairs at Penn State. Back with more right after this. Welcome back to WHVL's For the Record. We are talking Middle East relations with Dr. Flynt Leverett, Professor of International Affairs at Penn State and author of Going to Tehran, Why America Must Accept the Islamic Republic of Iran. Dr. Leverett, we left off talking about the overthrow of the Libyan government. That's all part of the Arab Spring. We were told when the Arab Spring by a lot of, and I call them thinkers, that this was going to be a great thing. This was democracy in action. That's turning out not to be the case.
Look, I think that just the language, Arab Spring, that a lot of thinkers used about this, reflects an underlying bias. A bias that basically, you know, if given a chance to determine their political future, that Middle Easterners are going to want to be basically secular liberal Democrats and will want to be partners with the United States. And the evidence, reams of polling data, what actually happens when Middle Eastern populations get the chance to vote in a reasonably open way. What the actual evidence says is that Middle Easterners certainly want to be more involved in politics. They want to have a say in who their leaders are. They want their opinion to have more of an influence on government policy, absolutely. But democracy for them is a foreign word. They want participatory politics and elections to unfold in a framework which is grounded very explicitly and in important ways in Islam. It's not that they haven't heard the argument for secular democracy or that they don't understand the argument. They've heard it, they've understood it. They think it does not jive with their culture and their sense of identity. They want to do something different. And in terms of dealing with the United States, what people overwhelmingly want in the region is governments that pursue foreign policy independence. They are not reflexively and implacably antagonistic to the United States, but there's a lot about American foreign policy in the region which they do not like, which they consider as basically having trampled on their interests, on their sensibilities, done real damage to them. And they want governments that will pursue foreign policy independence. Now, as long as the United States wants to be a hegemonic power, to be the dominant power in the Middle East, there's no way that U.S. policy can really accommodate the rise of more participatory governments in the region.
Part of being that dominant power with the Arab Spring, it was the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, a revolution in Bahrain. Because they have friendly ties with the U.S., there was no support there.
And we were fine with the Saudis sending troops into Bahrain to help the local authorities there put down that protest, yes.
And that takes me to the point, is there a double standard? And do people in other countries, do they see that and that make them more angered at the U.S.?
Of course they see it. It reinforces all of their most deeply negative perceptions of the United States and how it deals with this part of the world. And yes, there is a double standard. We decided that we wanted to overthrow Gaddafi as a way of kind of co-opting the Arab awakening for our own purposes, but we wouldn't support a Shia majority population in Bahrain that clearly is unhappy with being ruled by a Sunni monarchical dynasty that systematically excludes Shia from political power. A majority of the people there wanted political change, but that would jeopardize, as you say, the home base for the Fifth Fleet. So we were fine with the Saudis helping suppress that. In Syria, even though there's no evidence that the opponents to Bashar al-Assad actually represent anything close to a majority of Syrians, we support the opposition and say that Assad must go because we thought that's going to hurt Iran's regional position. All it has done is basically create an important incubating ground for the Islamic State. And we're going to be paying a price for that for a long time to come. Yes, there is a double standard.
Could those territories be salvaged? And what's it going to take to have those territories regain some form of normalcy?
It's going to take the kind of regional strategy that I talked about earlier, where we actually engage all important regional players. We shouldn't be trying to overthrow the Syrian government. The Syrian government is going to be a critical part of any strategy to get the Islamic State out of Syria. Iran is going to be critical to any effort to contain and ultimately reduce the presence of the Islamic State in Iraq. We need to be willing to deal with everyone in the region that matters, with everyone in the region that can help us achieve important objectives.
And I hate to jump to such a broad topic that we could talk for hours on, but where does Israel fit in among everything here that's going on?
Look, there's a kind of narrative about the U.S.-Israeli people's a special relationship, that it is grounded in shared democratic values and the historical legacy of the Holocaust. That is just historically not true. From 1948, when Israel declared its independence, until 1967, basically the first 20 years of Israel's existence, the United States gave basically no appreciable military or economic assistance to Israel. We didn't even really give them food aid. We only started to give Israel substantial military assistance after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, when Israel showed that it had the capacity to defeat and to seize territory from Arab states aligned with the Soviet Union. In a Cold War context, we thought that was useful. After the Cold War, we continued to think that Israeli military superiority in its own neighborhood would basically help the United States in achieving dominance in the region. I think that has been a fundamentally flawed calculation.
Dr. Leverett, it's certainly a fluid situation. We will keep an eye on it. And thank you for watching this edition of WHVL's For the Record. Have a great day.